Good evening and welcome to the Zachrilege cast, episode 8. First, I'd like to thank Dustin Williams of the Atheist Nomads podcast for sharing his journey out of the Seventh-day Adventists and giving me one more reason to not like spiders. By the way, yes, Wesley, I like Dustin more than you because we talked longer. Dustin was my guest 2 weeks ago. Sorry we missed out last week, but we're going to make it up for it with an extra cool show tonight. So before we begin tonight's show, I owe a friend a favor. On last week's Coronify Me, Paul had what sounded like every atheist and skeptic podcaster say a few words in support of Raif Badawi. Raif is a blogger in Saudi Arabia who is jailed with a sentence of 10 years and 1,000 lashes, administered at a rate of 50 a week. His crime? Speaking out against the theocracy. After one session, and yes, this is happening in the 21st century, the Saudi authorities stated that he was not healed enough to get subsequent sessions. There has been an international outcry to free the man who merely stated that the Saudi government could learn some lessons from going a more secular route. Raif's wife, Ensaf, and their children had to flee to Canada. Please listen to Coronify Me's 49th episode, which has a bunch of writers and podcasts who are better at words than me expressing their feelings on the issue. I was going to say a bunch of writers and podcasters who are better at words than me and Paul, but I'm being nice to him this week. For Raif and every writer with more guts than I have living in the Middle East, speaking out against any kind of theocracy, I salute your efforts. Now, for tonight's show. Tonight I introduce Dr. Jill Dermyer, a sole Georgia member of the Secular Therapist Project and clinical psychologist. I saw Jill give a speech at a local Freedom from Religion meeting, and yes, I occasionally leave the house. Jill has a unique perspective on religious trauma. Yes, trigger warning, because we will talk tonight about people attempting to leave religion and live a normal life, whatever that may be. What is religious trauma, you say? It's like other kinds of trauma, except most people tell you that you are the problem, not the trauma. Jill, how the heck are you?
I'm very well. How are you tonight?
Good, good. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So is it true that you're on the show? Does that mean we have doctor-client privilege?
Sure.
I know other people are listening to this, but you know.
Right. Go ahead.
It's a bad start. Okay, we'll get more serious. So, where are you from originally, and what kind of religious background do you have?
So I grew up in the North Georgia mountains in a small town of about 1,100 people. Very, very stereotypical Bible Belt territory. Very stereotypical Appalachia. However, my family were transplants from the Midwest and not particularly religious, not religious at all. And so I was not raised in any particular religious faith. I was baptized in the Episcopalian Church, and that was mainly to please my great-grandmother before she passed away. And other than that, religion was not a staple in our household at all.
Well, that sounds like a lot of people. Yeah, just do it for the grandparents.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Give them something to go with. So how did you decide, you know what, I'm going to be a psychologist? Like, how did that happen?
Well, you know, on a more personal note, it happened for personal reasons. My mother has battled with some mental health issues, and then also just plain out teenage angst curiosity. I was going through teenage angst and became very interested in authors like Sylvia Plath and Virginia Woolf and read a lot of that growing up, and just kind of found an interest in mental health issues, and then really a strong interest in how mental health issues are addressed in this country. And that was kind of the turning point for me when I became privy to the way that mental health is approached in our country and through our healthcare system, and ultimately I just wanted to do it in a different and better way, and so I sought out to do that.
So where did you go to school?
I did my undergrad at the University of Georgia, which is a football school with a little bit of education on the side. I loved Athens, the city where the University of Georgia is located. I did not particularly care for the University of Georgia itself. I moved to Atlanta and did my graduate school training at the Georgia School of Professional Psychology, which is a small private psychology school here in Atlanta.
And their football team is just terrible, I tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in Atlanta, we're in Georgia. It's always about the kind of football primarily.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned when you gave your talk that you did an internship. Was that when you were in Northwest Indiana?
Right.
What was
So,
that like?
so as part of the training to get your PhD in clinical psychology, you have to do what is the equivalent of what a medical doctor does their residency. We call it a predoctoral internship, and you don't have a whole lot of say-so in where you get placed for that. It's a match program, and that's kind of calculated through a logarithm. And I was matched in rural Northwest Indiana, about 50 miles south of Chicago. So in 2014, I moved to Chicago, and I did my internship at a community mental health center in rural Northwest Indiana. And when you're working in community mental health, that is basically low-cost and no-cost services that are usually funded by state grants or federal grants. And so the majority of people that I'm working with are either completely indigent or living well below the poverty line. And as I kind of talked about at the Freedom from Religion meeting a couple weeks back, is one of the year, so I moved there in 2014, and in late 2013, a very, very large Christian cult was disbanded and investigated by the federal government for rampant sexual abuse, not only here in the States, but also in Africa, where they were doing, again, quote-unquote, missionary work. And they had compounds in Africa, and they had compounds in Indiana as well. And so, again, that cult was broken up right before I moved to Indiana. So by the time I got there and started doing work in the local mental health system, many of the families from that cult were in desperate need of mental health care for sexual trauma, religious trauma, and kind of everything that comes with it.
Do you use like religious trauma as just, I don't know, is that a hard term to describe for people? Like, what do you mean by that specifically?
I don't think it's necessarily a hard term to describe or to explain. I think it's a term that people don't use enough and that nobody talks about. If I were to say I work with sexual trauma or I work with combat-related trauma, even as somebody who may not be psychologically minded, you would probably know what I was referring to. And so all like religion-based trauma is a trauma that has occurred somehow within the context or is somehow related to a religious upbringing, a religious belief, a religious value system. Kind of the easiest example that I can give is somebody who was sexually abused by a church leader or some sort of church authority member, and now has trauma from this, not only the sexual trauma, but also because it occurred within the context of their religious faith, if that's clear.
Yeah, do you think people accept abuse in religious contexts that they wouldn't in any other context?
That's one of the unique aspects, I think, of religion-based trauma is that so much of the trauma can be justified and explained away using the scripture or using the particular religious beliefs. So the idea that, again, let's go to this example of a young woman being sexually abused or maybe forced into marriage. Who's that? There was that gentleman, I shouldn't say gentleman, that's not the right word. That guy about that last week that was running a religious cult in Minnesota, and they found him in Brazil. Did you hear about this?
I think I missed that one. There seem to be a lot of these stories going around, people escaping to foreign countries.
Right. So he was running a religious cult in Minnesota and had many, many child brides. And when they found him in Brazil, he was actually with one of his followers, his long-term followers, and one of his child brides. And so she was completely devout in her faith, was completely devoted to him, and the sexual abuse that she was incurring or receiving, and the fact that she was forced into a child marriage was completely explained away in her eyes because it was in the name of God, it was in the name of Jesus, and she was following this holy leader who was telling her what to do. And so often, even in non-cult circumstances, this is the case, where because you so devoutly believe in your church leader, it's hard to believe that what he's doing is wrong, even if it is so blatantly wrong.
I guess in those cases, it's just kind of like a cult of personality, but like taken to the next level in a way.
I think so, yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
So what ultimately came of that cult, and was it just one leader, the Christian cult you had in Indiana?
No, it was several. I think actually like 5 men ended up going to trial. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was 5. But what ended up happening was that there was several other, and these were all, in this particular circumstance, were all older white males. There were several of them that got off on technicalities or just lack of evidence.
I guess, and there weren't too many people willing to testify in that case.
Yeah, I think there wasn't a lot of people that were willing to testify, and then also because so much of the abuse happened in Africa, it was hard to have substantial evidence to bring to court.
So but they were.
Sorry, I was just going to say, ultimately, the church was disbanded, and they had a school, and that school was, disbanded as well. And so then a lot of those kids had to be shuffled into public schools.
Who do you think had the hardest transition, the kids or the adults who were involved in this?
I think this question actually came up when we were at that Freedom from Religion meeting, and it's not something I had really thought about before, but the answer was pretty straightforward, that it was the women, it was the mothers and the wives that I think were particularly hit hardest by this, because I think they had on some level, I think a lot of those women had a semblance of what was normal, and they knew that what was happening was wrong, whereas most of the children had grown up in the church from the time that they were babies until the time that they were 18 years old, if not older. And so that was their normal. They didn't know anything else. And so for them, it was just kind of like, yeah, this is what happens. Children and women are abused. The church is abusive. That's how it's supposed to go. They didn't have anything else to compare it to.
I don't know, this is always a tough subject to talk about because it's a hard one in this country, but how do we kind of say, if you're a religious person, believe what you want to believe, but this does cause harm in other cases, and do you display that in this particular case with this particular cult, it caused harm to people? I don't know. Not really a question in there.
Well, no, I think I kind of see what you're getting at, and what came up for me just when you asked that question was that as I've started putting myself out there as a therapist that specializes in religion-based trauma, I've found that it's a very fine line to say that I work with religion-based trauma and advocate around that and raise awareness of it, and on the other side, not wanting to be anti-religious. Because in my personal life, I have lots of, friends and acquaintances and coworkers that are very religious, and I think that they're very, very good people, and I think that they are strong in their faith, and they do well by it, and they don't force it on other people, and they're still progressive in their social values. them being religious is just one part of who they are. So I don't want to say that I'm anti-religious, and it's hard, and sometimes it can be hard to put that message out there and raise awareness without coming across as anti-religious. And so even just kind of raising awareness around it, because I don't want to, again, on the other hand, I don't want to say, oh, these are isolated incidences, it doesn't happen that much. Like, it happens a lot, and it happens every day, and it's something that needs to be paid attention to. And the best way to do that is just to talk about it more and bring awareness around it.
I think it's hard to, I don't know, prepare yourself, because it seems like not only are you dealing with therapy, but you're dealing with like some of the hardest situations a person ever is going to go through. Mm-hmm. How are you able to get yourself prepared for that and deal with someone with compassion who's dealing with a very traumatic situation?
So you picked a very auspicious day to ask that question. So it's because that's an issue that's not at all isolated to religion-based trauma. That's a question that is related to being a trauma therapist in general, and also just being a therapist or a psychologist. It's we spend a lot of time in our training learning how to sit with people's traumas and how to sit with their stories every single day and really sit with them. Like, sit with them, hear them, experience what they've experienced, feel what they're feeling, and then at the end of the day be able to put that all into a box and go home to our daily lives or our public or our private lives. And that really just comes with years of training and a lot of self-care. Learning how to hear all these really, really traumatic stories, and at the end of the day still be able to go home and take care of oneself, and so that you have the abilities to go back out there the next day and do it again.
Yeah, it's just, it seems like I salute you for what you do, just because, and not just the religious side, but just being able to deal with it, because I've had a few situations where I've had to go to therapy, and it's been ultimately helpful. It is interesting to see how people deal with it, because my own traumatic event involved me being in a medically induced coma in 2001 due to a staph infection, and basically coming out of it and it taking me about 3 months to recover. And I think it just helped for people to listen, as opposed to someone just go, oh my God, I can't believe that happened, because it is, right. Oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And you probably hear a lot of, oh my God, I can't believe that happened, quite often with what you do. But yeah, it's something that sticks with you when you have that in your past, and it pops up when you don't expect it, and you get over it, maybe never 100%, but you definitely improve as you go. And maybe it's just distance from the event, but I'm just thinking of the trauma and the religious terms, just being separated from that entire community, which had to have happened a lot, especially in that situation with that cult.
Right. And you bring up a good point on that, because so even, and to bring up, I'll self-disclose as well, a traumatic event in my life is suicide. Okay, I had a very good friend suicide a few years ago, and when I made that comment earlier about this being an auspicious day for you to ask that question, is because I had to deal with a suicide crisis at work today, and immediately I was triggered. Okay, and what I mean by using the word triggered is that even though I was in go mode and I was helping my client and I was figuring everything out and I was doing my job, I immediately knew inside of me that I was feeling very, very triggered. And I was thinking, emotionally, I was thinking about my friend, I was experiencing all type of stuff, and that's what comes in the wake of any trauma. If you personally were to listen to a news story on the nightly news about somebody who had to be put in a medically induced coma, you're probably going to go right back to where you were in 2001. in the wake of that tragic experience for you and experiencing everything that you did, you would be triggered. People with any trauma, somebody who has been kidnapped and raped by somebody in a white van, anytime they see a white van, they're going to feel triggered. For people with religious-based traumas, and this is something that I think might be particularly unique to this type of trauma, is that the triggers are everywhere. And I talked about this at the meeting, where even things like holidays, every Sunday when you would have gone to church, like you're going to wake up every single Sunday and feel a little bit triggered, a little bit re-traumatized. Anytime you hear people talking about religion, which is everywhere this day and age, there's just going to be so many multiple and ample opportunities to re-experience your own trauma and go through that emotional experience.
Well, first I just wanted to say sorry about your friend. And
oh, I'm sorry about what you went through.
It's just, I think ultimately we're all traumatized.
Yeah.
And we do get that kind of message. It's kind of like watching, and I can't remember the shows about the like World War II, that group of soldiers that went through this specific series of events, but for most of them, after the fact, none of them ever talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that contributed to some of them dying younger than they would have, because that was the tough it out kind of era.
Right.
And I think we hear a lot of that. That message keeps coming through, like, just, rubs of the football term, rub some dirt in it, you'll be fine, instead of something happened, let's deal with it, and let's not call everybody a wuss or something negative,
right,
just because, like, hey, I got to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I wanted to say before this whole thing, hey, trigger warning, because we're going to talk about some tough stuff. But
Right.
I think it's good that we're able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. But what? So you've been in Georgia your entire life, right?
Yeah.
Internship?
South Florida until I was 8, and then up to the North Georgia mountains, and been here ever since.
Well, what does it feel like to kind of come back? Because you mentioned that you kind of did a similar project to what you were doing in Indiana with North Georgia, kind of helping people out who may not have the means to usually get it.
Mm-hmm. How is that experience different here in Georgia? Is that what you're asking?
Or what's it like to go back and do that now, and go back to kind of where you're from?
I guess it wasn't too much of a transition for me, and maybe that's because rural Northwest Indiana is a heck of a lot like the rural South. There wasn't a whole lot of differences I felt between the two, aside from the fact that if you talk to a stranger in the grocery line, they'll look at you like you're crazy and not even having a conversation with you, which people will do in the South. But as far as coming back to Atlanta, it wasn't that much of a transition for me. The work was still kind of the same. The big differences for me is that I have moved into the private sector, and I am no longer in nonprofit work at the moment. So the clientele that I am being exposed to is drastically different than what I was seeing when I was in the nonprofit sector, which I was through all of my training.
But did you say you went like once a month to North Georgia to kind of help people out? I forget what that program was that you were working with.
I did. So I have 2 different jobs that I do. I have my private therapy practice, which is right in the city, and that's all therapy. And then my other job that I do is I work as an independent contractor doing neuropsychological evaluations. And this, in a nutshell, is let's kind of a basic case that would come to that office is somebody who went to their neurologist because they were having memory problems. The neurologist thinks that they probably have Alzheimer's, and there's no way to officially diagnose Alzheimer's. The only way that you can do that is through having a neuropsychological evaluation. that's where I come in, and I do a series of tests that assess for different brain functions: memory, learning, attention, problem solving, things like that. And then I can help clarify if the diagnosis is Alzheimer's, if it's dementia, or if it's something else. And through that work, I've been, through one of the people that I contract with, we go up to the North Georgia mountains about once a month and provide services up there, because there's like literally no neuropsychologist in that area, and it keeps these elderly people from having to drive into the city.
Okay, and you mentioned that when you went up to North Georgia that some people were reluctant to even talk to a therapist. That's something you get a lot?
They, yes, absolutely, more so in the like up in the mountains and in the more rural areas than here in the city. People don't, there's the stigma around mental health is just very, very strong. And so people will not come to you with a, okay, so when I'm doing therapy in the city, people will literally walk into my office with a piece of paper and say, okay, I Googled myself. I am pretty sure I have depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, OCD, and anxiety. And you go, okay, well, let's really kind of talk about that and figure out what actually is going on. But when you go to the country, people say, my heart's racing, my stomach hurts, my wife's getting on my nerves, you know, like my back aches. They have all these like bodily complaints. And when you really start to get to the root of it, a lot of those, you know, physiological complaints at their core are oftentimes due to mental health issues. The other area where I'm seeing this, which you might find interesting because I saw or kind of discovered your fantasy football personality and the work that you do there.
Oh yeah, I do have another side.
So my other contract with my neuropsych testing is with the NFL. And for ex-NFL players who have applied for benefits for neuropsychological damages that are related to play during their time with the NFL. And that's another population where I see a lot of stigma. A lot of these ex-NFL players are coming to me and they are very, very depressed, very depressed. And a lot of it's just because of life transitions. They used to be famous, they used to have a lot of money, and now they're disabled for a lot of different reasons, and they can't work anymore. Their life has changed so much, they become very depressed. But they will never tell me that they're depressed. They say, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then I have them fill out a questionnaire that will indicate severe levels of depression, a lot of times suicidal ideation. And when I actually start to talk to them about it, they'll open up a little bit, but then ultimately they usually tell me that they don't feel comfortable talking to a woman about it.
Yeah, that's a good or very bad version of the rub the dirt in it kind of analogy. There are players, I know there's a guy who played for the Bears who actually shot himself in the heart because he wanted his brain to be studied after he died.
Yeah.
There was Junior Seau who was just put in the NFL Hall of Fame who killed himself maybe a year after he retired. Yeah, I mean, not even for players who have injury concerns, but the transition they have to make is very dramatic from you are a big star and then you are kind of nothing and you don't have any job skills. And it's so, I mean, that's what's hard about these concussion symptoms, and you're talking about Alzheimer's earlier, is these are not like black and white situations. They are on a very long kind of, I don't know, from A to Z, and most of us exist somewhere in the middle. But that's, yeah, it's interesting because you at first you go, oh yeah, North Georgia mountains, those people are all country or they're all religious, they don't deal with therapy. Then it's like, oh, in this mainstream big America with the flag and the bald eagle, National Football League, we also don't want to talk about feelings. And we don't want to talk about trauma. What don't know. How could it be unstigmatized, or is it just a matter of it's going to take time?
It's going to take time. It's, even you you heard about the latest shooting? Well, there was two shootings in Atlanta today that got media attention, but the one of a white officer on an unarmed naked black man over in Chamblee.
Yeah, I think I heard about that. Yeah.
So, and then he was demonstrating abnormal behaviors. He was running around naked. He was banging down people's doors. He was crawling on the ground. And immediately everybody starts talking about, oh, he has a mental illness. Mental illness. That's everything that was in the news. And my immediate thought was, okay, so what's going to happen likely is that people will, tomorrow all on the Twitter, it's going to be like, oh, mental health, break the stigma. We need to pay attention to mental health. It was the same thing after the Newtown shootings. In addition to gun regulations, everybody was talking about we need better mental health. And then it's going to fall by the wayside, and people are going to stop talking about it. It's still not going to be funded anywhere near the amount that it needs to be funded. We're going to continue to have severely underfunded services in mental health for a very long time. But the more people talk about it, the more they advocate for it and have awareness around it. That's at this point, that's the only thing I know to do to bring attention to it and to help break the stigma.
Because it's clear that, Jill, you are the only one who can solve this problem, so
That's
we figured we'd do it tonight. Yeah, just no pressure here. You got it. You got all the answers. I can feel it. You will save us. But do you think that kind of mental illness, is that compared to other, I guess, medical research, is that not getting the attention and the dollars that it needs?
No.
So I'm grabbing a cord. Not doing anything weird, I promise.
Okay.
Gotta
my short answer to that question is no. I don't know that it is, is it medical illness and then mental health is number two? I'm not going to be the one to say that, but as far as where services are needed, because I know a lot of different areas, even in the medical field, are underserved, but it is a giant area. And I think if mental health was really appropriately attended to, we would start to see a pretty amazing trickle-down effect in a lot of other areas of our society.
Yeah, I think there was one study, there's that big talk about, autism and measles, and just the fact that more kids are getting diagnosed as having autism. I think that's more of and I think this goes to mental health as well, like we're just seeing it in more people besides just pushing it aside. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that means that these things are happening more often. It's just we didn't pay attention. It was close enough, So maybe that's part of it, and I don't know. But these are all difficult subjects for sure.
And I'll kind of play both sides of the coin on that one, because I agree with you that I think a lot of these things we just didn't have a name for. It's not like 100 years ago nobody was autistic. They were. We just the name for that they were referred to in the medical text were idiots, mentally deficient, retards. Like those were the names that was the only vocabulary they had for things that they didn't quite understand. And now we understand things better. We have more specific names for them. So it's not that these things didn't exist. We're more aware of what they are. The other side of that coin is that a lot of mental health diagnoses get thrown around and just assigned in an inefficient and often inaccurate manner. I can't tell you every single time I hear somebody, I don't think a day goes by that I don't hear somebody say, oh yeah, my brother's bipolar, or my boyfriend's bipolar, or so-and-so's bipolar. And that's just like the, diagnosis du jour. There's one every few few years. A few years ago, it was ADHD. Everybody had ADHD. Now it's bipolar disorder. And in a few years, and then, there's just going to be another one that people are just going to start throwing around.
I wonder if it's just a education issue. I mean, I don't think I ever heard a peep about mental health except maybe in a college class, growing up. So it just wasn't part of what we learned about what happens with people. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Sometimes there are these subjects like, well, we can't talk about that. That's the bad stuff, and that's the stuff we're like, no, that needs to be out in the light, so it gets better.
Well, so can I ask now, just out of curiosity, like what your educational background is? Because I'm just curious, as like a well-educated man that's successful, growing up, like it is curious to me that you would have never like had or not had any sort of like significant exposure to like what mental health it is or what it should look like.
No, I went to University of Missouri, got a degree in journalism, so that means I'm qualified to do Google Plus Hangouts. So that's what I have, and not a lot of exposure. Like I mentioned, when I had my big crazy event in 2001, I think that's the first time I actually saw a therapist about 6 months after it all ended. And I also was going through a breakup too, so I think that was a good time to talk about everything. And it was, I think I went for about 2 months, and then I was like, okay, I'm better. I don't know if I'm good, but
right.
The background, I think now everybody becomes, maybe everybody feels like they're an expert quicker because of the internet, and you can, like you said, the people will come in to see you who have already self-diagnosed, which might work better with a physical malady than a mental one, I'm guessing, but maybe they get one right every once in a while.
Yeah.
But sometimes we feel like we're more experts than we are. That's why I like to have people who are experts on this show, so they can let me know what's going on. Because I'm just confused. How did you get hooked up with the Secular Therapist Project?
By complete accident. I was just doing some research on religion-based trauma. I came across the Recovery from Religion Foundation, and they have created the Secular Therapist Project. And so I literally just, happened upon it on the internet. It's a free online referral network, both free for providers and free for potential clients. And so, yeah, I filled out a profile. It was very heavily vetted by 4 other clinicians and they ask for access to all your social media and all different kinds of things to ensure that you are not, spreading these non-secular messages and that you are actually going to practice in a secular manner. And yeah, my application was approved, and so I got hooked up with them just about 3 or 4 months ago.
So did you say you were the only secular therapist in Georgia, at least in this program?
And when I got my application letter from the president of Recovery from Religion, they were very, very excited to have me on board as a Georgia therapist because there were no other therapists at that time registered. I can't say for certain that that's the truth now. I've been trying to spread the word and have a lot of my colleagues sign up. But yeah, at that time it was the truth.
Do you feel like there's a lot of pressure? You're the only one.
No, well, I don't actually a little bit because even today I had somebody contact me through the Secular Therapist Project, and I was not able to work with them for, kind of just, you can't work with every single person that contacts you. Some people you're just not a right fit for. You don't have the resources for them. And I wanted so badly to refer them to other people, and I didn't have anybody. They needed somebody that was very, very secular. And I didn't have any names to give them, and I kind of had to send them in a general referral direction, and I don't like doing that. So maybe in that way it's a little bit of pressure. But no, I'm happy to be on board and happy to spread the word.
I think there's a way to make the word secular less of a dirty word.
I guess just say it a lot. Sometimes if you say words out loud enough, they have a different meaning and they feel a little different.
Because I always think of secular as, if you're religious, you're religious. Don't let it mess with the business of the state, and don't try to proselytize other people. Not you have to be an atheist, which I think sometimes is the way it's defined in kind of the right wing mainstream.
Yeah, I agree that I think for a lot of people, the words secular and atheist are completely synonymous. Um, and like you said, that's not at all the case for a lot of people.
That is true. So let's see. We talked about the religious stuff. You mentioned, let's see, this term I see, time-delimited psychotherapy. What is that?
Time-limited dynamic psychotherapy.
That is the
Also,
word. Okay.
yeah, it's short TD or I can TLDP. Time-limited dynamic psychotherapy is the particular therapeutic orientation that I utilize in my work. Um, a lot of people are going to be familiar with psychodynamic therapy or cognitive behavioral theory. These are the other very popular or common forms of therapy. And TLDP is one of those as well. It was developed in the early 80s in Tennessee by a man named Jeffrey Binder, who I studied under. He was one of the founders of my program. And it's a form of talk therapy that is evidence-based, which means that it has gone through the ringer when it comes to clinical trials, the same way that Zoloft went through clinical trials to show that it can be effective in decreasing symptoms of depression. Same thing for time-limited dynamic psychotherapy and these other forms of talk therapy. And really what TLDP focuses on is what we refer to as cyclical maladaptive patterns. And what that comes down to is that early in life, we learn messages about ourselves, others, and the world. And those messages usually are given to us by our early childhood caregivers. And we carry those messages with us from childhood into adulthood. And they shape our behaviors, and they shape how we relate with other people, how we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves. And a lot of times what can happen is that those messages will lead to very adaptive behaviors early on. But then as we move into adulthood, and if we're particularly rigid with those messages, with how we feel, how we think, how we behave, then it can start to become maladaptive, and it can lead to psychological stress. That's a lot of psychobabble, mumbo jumbo. The easiest example that I try to give is if you have a child that is abused early on in life, that child often will tell themselves, I'm bad and I deserve to be abused. Other people are harmful and abusive, and the world is abusive, and therefore I must retreat in order to keep myself safe. Again, that's going to be very adaptive for that child because retreating and isolating will keep them safe. But as they move into adulthood, if they're still carrying those messages that they're bad and everyone is bad, then it's going to keep them from forming positive relationships, from living in the world, and from having a positive experience in life. And so you want to try and break that maladaptive way of thinking and give them a more adaptive way to cope. Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, it makes me think about some of the stuff you mentioned during your talk about kind of how someone who's raised in a religious society is told that they are bad, and if something bad is happening to them, it is their fault, not
Right.
the fault of whoever caused this thing to happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
But how are you able to, I don't know, adjust someone's thinking who's had this? How do you go from maladaptive to the good adaptive?
Okay, that's a great question. So, yeah, and the message that you are bad and that this is your fault, that's a pretty common message with most traumas. To be a pretty pervasive message that we tell ourselves in the wake of a traumatic experience, is that somehow we've done something that made us deserving of this bad thing that happened to us. And as the therapist, I'm there to really just kind of, because a lot of times people don't have language around that thought. They're not going to come into my office and say, I think I'm bad because I was sexually abused. They're going to come into my office and say, I am binge eating and I'm having, I'm self-harming and I'm really depressed and I don't get out of my bed. And so the first thing that I would have to do is say, okay, well, what are you thinking about when you're binge eating, when you're self-harming, when you're cutting yourself, when you're not getting out of bed? Well, I'm thinking about how terrible of a person I am. And so my first question in that instance would be, okay, who was the first person, or when was the first time that you ever remember being told that you were bad? Who was the first person that you ever remember told you that you are, bad and that you need to be punished? And that, can usually be pretty easily identified by the person. And so you would start to explore that relationship. Why were they giving you that message? When they gave you that message, how did it make you feel? How did you react? How did you behave? And you start to just kind of dissect it down and get to the root of the problem. And then once you've kind of identified it, and to be honest, the identification and to identify the root or the origin of psychological distress tends to be the easy part. The hard part comes in changing that message and helping that person to have a different internal dialogue, having an internal dialogue that says, no, I'm a good person, I'm deserving of more, I'm going to treat myself better, and I'm going to act and, I'm going to live in the world in a way that I'm more deserving of, in a way that's going to bring me more joy. Just because they usually have developed habits, and you got to try and break those habits and instill new ones. And that just comes with, practice. It just, same way that you learn how to play basketball. It just takes practice. It takes time.
Okay, this is a random comment. Does it seem like, I was thinking of the movie Good Will Hunting, where, there was like a therapy involved, and there was a dramatic breakthrough. Do people just assume that when you're in therapy that you're going to have like this dramatic breakthrough that happens like immediately?
Yes. We call it the magic pill. Everybody's coming in looking for the magic fix, and people often get very frustrated when, there's the stereotype of the therapist like sitting back and not saying anything and just saying, well, how does that make you feel? Oh, and not really giving advice. A lot of times people are seeking very specific answers around a problem that they're having, and they want you to just give them advice and just tell them what to do and tell them how to fix it. And that, my response to that is always to go back to the science, where, again, psychotherapy is a proven science to heal psychological distress. On average, people will start to know, if they go to weekly sessions, weekly hour-long sessions with somebody who is practicing evidence-based techniques, then they can start to see changes by the 8th session. So 2 months of therapy, people will generally start to see changes. The most significant and long-lasting changes are going to happen at session 20. So that's a good 5 months of therapy. Being committed, being motivated, and coming on a weekly basis for 5 months, you can start to see very significant, long-lasting change. After that, the changes will start to plateau a little bit. And so when people come to me and they want that quick fix, I just have to say, listen, this is the science. This is how treatment works. You don't get one session of chemotherapy to cure cancer. It takes several sessions. It's the same way with psychotherapy.
Well, you say this is science, but you could be in league with the devil, right?
That's true. Yes, that's true.
Had to go back there again. The psychotherapy, man, that's it's still a relatively new field of study, right? So it's going through. I don't know. It seems like it's relatively new. I could be totally wrong because I haven't studied it.
Hmm.
You're like, you are.
Yeah. I mean, we're going back a couple hundred years, if not a little bit more, in when the main schools of thought really started to develop. And Lord knows Freud was wrong about a million and one different things, and so were his colleagues. But they had some good ideas that sparked some very profound schools of thought, and those went on, and they've been consistently studied and revolutionized and improved upon for ages now. And there's the controlled studies, like the actual, like, in the laboratory controlled studies at looking at what forms of talk therapy are most beneficial, I guess probably started maybe like in the 50s, and then have been being improved upon since that time. Where things started to derail is when people started to take psychotherapy lightly and move it into a non-evidence-based practice approach. There's a lot of people out there now that are doing therapy, and they're not really doing therapy. They think, oh, I'm a good listener, I can talk to people, I gotcha. Like I can handle this. But there's just a lot of people out there that are not doing what they should be doing, and that are calling it therapy.
Well, I mean, to do what you do, you need at least a PhD. I mean, is that not correct?
So I'm a doctoral level clinician, but you can do therapy as a master's level clinician. So in the state, it's going to be a little bit different in every state, but in the state of Georgia, you can be an LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor, an LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapist, or you can be an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker. And all three of those are master's level therapists or counselors. But to be a psychologist, you have to have a PhD.
Well, I'm glad that you're, bringing home the point that there's a lot of science behind this, and you have to go through a lot of school. If you're a lot of those pastors running those cults, I'm not sure how much school they went through.
No. And even because there are programs, and even here in Atlanta, where you can get a master's or a doctorate in pastoral counseling, but your schooling, that person's schooling is completely taking place within the church, and it's all the training programs are all about teaching pastoral counseling skills, and pastoral counseling is nothing. It has not been shown, or has and might and I guess I haven't done enough research around this, but I know that it has not been shown to be an evidence-based, clinically effective approach for most common mental health issues.
So don't go to one of those.
It may be supportive, but it's not been shown to relieve the stress.
So did you enjoy your presentation in front of the Freedom from Religion group, and are you going to be doing more of that in the future? Please say yes.
I really hope so. They had asked me to meet with some of the other kind of like atheistic-centered meetup groups. So that's one avenue I'd like to approach. I would really love to also just, I might go back to my school and do to my program and just do kind of like an informed presentation there. I'm definitely looking for any other ways that I can branch out into the kind of, public and kind of get this message across to people that are not necessarily familiar with religious-based trauma or with traumatic stress in general. Ultimately, I enjoyed my talk with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I don't know, did you look at the meetup page afterwards with some of the group discussions?
I saw there were a couple comments that, yeah, people were very negative, but that's something I think I see it a lot of kind of atheist kind of groups. People are just
Yeah.
like letting off steam, and
Hmm.
sometimes it can come off as harsh, especially if this is someone's first visit to this kind of group.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I kind of get both sides of that.
Yeah, and I do as well. I think what was upsetting for me was to think that there was people that were coming for, because there was several people there that day that said that they were kind of like just coming out of a religious fold, or maybe I'm thinking about leaving. I think they were kind of, just new to the secular world. And I hate to think that they came there looking for support and didn't find it. But like you said, on the other side of the coin, I don't necessarily think that this was the environment for that. Like, freedom from religion is pretty. Uh, I don't think that they're hesitant in their message at all to say that they are atheists, that they are secular, they are out there for a very specific movement. So what I would ultimately love to do is to find a platform and find an environment where those other people who are kind of new to the secular world can come and can find the support and the education that they were looking for.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there because that is something. I think that's part of what recovering from religion's platform is. There are a lot of people coming out of religion, and there are a lot of people who are quote unquote in the closet and think they want to leave, but they can't because they will lose their entire family, or
Right.
someone who's growing up still depend on their family, knows that they're going to get cut off or kicked out. See, Nate Phelps is an extreme example of that.
Hmm.
But that's something I'm trying to do a little bit with this show, is to show here's the wide range of people that are available, because I've been to probably a dozen different atheist type groups in Atlanta, and you do get the ones that are kind of the bitch fests, and then you get the ones where the groups are kind of supportive. It's like a big group therapy session
Hmm.
in a way, and it's very necessary. Because I go to a group, and this couple showed up one time, and they were in this church, and they had to move out of their town because once they left their church, their friends just abandoned them. They had nobody, and you have to start over. And the thing with the atheist community is we don't necessarily have these churches, so you have to find these groups. You have to find a new family social structure. Sometimes it's just online, but there are these groups in person too.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't work for you, like the freedom from religion, if it's too much, I've been to a few where like, no, yeah, you find another one.
Right.
But it is tough, and I really feel just for people who were raised in a religious environment and had that ingrained in them, and then they want to leave just because I can't get my head around how difficult that would be.
Hmm. Yeah,
Just your
to leave all
entire.
of that behind.
Yep. So did you say you have your own hangout/podcast? You do your own kind of thing?
We don't do it on Hangout. We just record them in our office, and then
Okay.
we put them on. It's very unofficial, though. We usually just put them on our websites or put them in. Oh God, I don't even know. What's the SoundCloud thing?
Is that Stitcher, or is that just the
Not Stitcher
Tunes of the
that we
Week kind of
use.
thing? I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway, it's very unofficial. I'm pretty sure no one other than us has ever listened to it. But I will let you know when we put on a new episode. We try to, so I'm part of a collaborative. It's me and 5 other clinicians, 2 master's level and 4 psychologists. And we have way too much fun nerding out and talking about psychologically related stuff and social issues and whatnot. So a lot of times what happens is we just end up recording our conversations. They're very unstructured. They're tangential. They go nowhere. But we do post them on our respective websites. So
So it's like a psychotherapist super group you got going there?
yeah, it's like if you wanted to be a fly on a wall in a group full of psychologists.
I think that it would be something. I just say in the podcast audio world, there's always something for anybody, and no matter what subject you're looking at, you're going to be able to find lots of options. So
Right.
I think it's kind of cool that she gets to kind of talk shop about that, and not have to be, I don't know, so official. Anyway, taking up a lot of your time tonight, and we dealt with some technical issues. So is there anything that we didn't cover tonight you want to talk about?
Not off the top of my head, just, spreading the word for the Secular Therapist Project. If there is somebody out there looking for a secular therapist in your area, all you have to do is go to seculartherapistproject.com and type in your zip code, and you can peruse profiles of providers in your area.
Yes, that's a very, very important service that's being done. So before we call a night, is there anything that you wanted to ask me?
Oh, goodness. Now you put me on the spot.
I turn it on its head just for once.
Well, so what is your favorite outlet for discussing religious and issues, atheist issues, and whatnot in the Atlanta area?
Well, there's one group I go to. It's GUST. What is it? The Guanetians Understanding Secular Truths. It's not a well-done acronym, but they meet once a month. And I found that group to be pretty supportive, and they have a secret Facebook page. Because a lot of people, that's one thing I've noticed in the atheist community, a lot of people have a second Facebook account for this, or a second Twitter account. This is my second Twitter account. Just because it's just hard to be out in the open about this sort of thing. So I haven't been to a lot of other groups like that many other times. That's why I wanted to go to the Freedom from Religion, because I've been to the Atlanta Humanist Hall a few times, and haven't quite meshed. And of course, I have my own religion on Sundays called football, so a lot of these meetings are on Sunday, so it's hard for me to get there. So when the off season happens, I'm all over it. And when I saw the subject and you were talking, I was like, let's do this. This should be fun. So I enjoyed that. And I'm glad we're able to talk again and expand on things. And we may have to try it again sometime. And I'm sure there's other things to talk about, right? We're not done.
I think so. Yeah, we're not done.
So where can you mentioned secular therapists? Where else can people find you, follow you?
My website is jilldermyer.com. I am on Twitter at Dr. Jill ATL, and also at Tainted Love ATL.
So that's another Twitter account?
That's a Twitter account I have for a psychotherapy group that I run for modern day complicated relationship issues.
Oh, we're all complicated.
Yeah. In this day and age, everything is complicated. Hashtag, it's complicated.
It's complicated. It's good that I feel like in general we're getting a more open world, which is good, but then people are going to have to start explaining a lot of things, and that's just the nature of life. So before we go, I'm going to have a final word. So my final word this week comes out regarding change. I had to deal with a big personal change recently when my job disappeared. Sometimes change can be a good thing, and we're not going to change the change no matter what we do. My buddies Bobby C. and Miss Ashley of No Religion Required recently moved to the Secular Media Group run by David C. Smalley. I was so mad. I mean, I had to subscribe to their podcast feed for the second time. Okay, I wasn't mad. I was happy because I do the show to support other shows, and this is a big deal for their show and for David. Listen to this week's super duper No Religion Required Anniversary Blowout Edition with David C. Smalley to get the inside skinny of what's happening with NRR and Dogma Debate. Most atheist podcasters get paid nothing, and unlike me, they have expenses. It's not cheap to host websites, to buy equipment, and most importantly, carve out the time to do these shows. Support them any way you can, and the good news is you don't even have to support these shows financially. You can support them through social media or giving them a positive review on iTunes. So we're all reaching for a more secular country and world, and these great people are on the front lines. Now I'll go back to taking their podcast comments out of context on Twitter. I have some great guests on deck, including Chris Seathan Heathen from Unbuckling the Bible Belt Nancy Drew of the Twitters, Facebooks, and Paul's Harem, and Callie from the Gaytheist Manifesto will be coming up in future weeks. So thank you, Jill, for being on tonight. It was very illuminating.
I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, definitely, and we'll be posting this online so everybody can see it. Anyone wants to follow the show, go to the Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook, Zachrilege on Twitter. It is hard to spell, but it's right there. Right there. Anyway, I can't point it myself. So thanks again, everybody. Good night, and keep thinking. Oops, sorry.